Welcome to the first video in our Lucid Air long-term series. I've driven almost every iteration of this car. I spent 6 months in an early pre-production or early production car, and now the 25 model year with all the manufacturing updates, software, and hardware changes. And the goal was to look at how this car evolved. This is Lucid's first car, first sedan, and they built it from the ground up internally. They didn't outsource all the design. It's made in the United States in a factory that they built here. And like anything you create that's this complicated, there's gonna be some growing pains, and they've been honest about it. But the thing is, people are spending a lot of money for this car. And there's only so many excuses you can make in terms of like some of these issues. And that's what I wanted to see. I wanted to see the evolution of the car from where it started to where it is today. And I chose this as a long-term vehicle because I really liked it. And when you like something, it's far more fun and engaging to kind of go through that story. Let's talk about the pros and cons of this and what they've improved. Well, I can say unequivocally, the panel fitment on the inside has been fixed. Yes, there are certain trim pieces that are not perfect, but it's in line with about 90% of other luxury cars. There are no creaks and rattles. The software experience is smoothed out quite a bit. I still drop some Bluetooth connections once in a while, or there are buffering issues with it after like the 15-minute mark of making calls, but overall it's far more stable than it used to be. Door handle deployment is far more consistent with the key fob. I believe they made some manufacturing changes with antenna design. The electronic key, when you use the phone software, does seem to work okay. It's not a replacement for like a regular key. And I always have the backup NFC card. I would say it's about 50% better than the earlier builds. I have had zero issues with the front and the trunk operation, and also all of the drivability is good. It feels like a very solid car. The one thing I did go from, the previous car had the glass roof, the glass canopy, and now this has the aluminum roof. I will say the aluminum roof feels vastly better in terms of absorbing sound, road noise, wind noise. It's better to have a conversation. Bluetooth calling's quieter. And the big thing is you don't have the thermal radiation issue of the glass roof. If you're driving in the summer, the car heats up a lot with the glass roof, which means you're running the AC far more, which means you're hurting your range quite a bit more. So I prefer the aluminum roof. The car feels way more solid than it used to, and the audio system even sounds great, even better in here. There's less of the knocking noise that I heard from the bass drivers in the previous earlier car. It just could be the way the car's put together. So the big thing is most of those problems that I had with the original car have largely been solved with this, including the range. I'm getting exactly that. And in this Grand Touring trim with the most horsepower, my trip average has been 3.7 miles per kilowatt hour. Now, if you go with the pure rear-wheel drive, you can get almost up to 5. They report 5, but let's say on a bad day, you're getting close to that. The range is incredible on these cars. Probably one of the most efficient EVs, at least on the road at this point. And one of the reasons why I love the Air is because it's not like a normal car, and the fact that the packaging, and it sounds silly, the usage of space is better than most CUVs and small SUVs. That's because you have a frunk. And in the frunk, that trunk area, I can fit a full international style luggage. When I visit my friends in Siberia, I can fit a picture of my daughter from my third ex-wife and my weight set. And you can use that to put things that you don't use all the time to eat up your trunk space. Then when you go to the trunk, yes, you can put your seats down. But not only can you leave your seats up and have the room in the back, you can still fit 3 international style luggages in the back. If you're not a traveler, you can fit a full-size stroller, a small stroller, the weigh bag, your kids' stuff, and still fit groceries and a first aid kit and all that crap. So that's why I really appreciate this car. The other pro is the interior spaces. I never have to adjust the front seats when I have a back passenger. 2 full-size adults can sit in the back and still have legroom, and I don't have to move my seats. If you have car seats, front or back facing, if you're a normal sized person, you almost never have to adjust your front seats either to accommodate the kids in the back. And these are a big deal for a car you're using every day. And this is about the only EV of this size that is packaged this well. Yes, like some of the competitors have caught up, like Ioniq 5 has great utilization of space. Some of the Teslas have great utilization of space. But unlike the iX, which is also a great electric car, no frunk. A lot of these vehicles have almost no frunk. None of the GMs for their Ultium architectures have frunks. So this car is unique and special in that space if you're looking for an EV. The other thing I really appreciate, and this is not just this car specifically, is when I'm on a phone call and for work and I pull into the garage and I don't want to walk in and be distracted, I can leave this car on in the garage with the AC running or the heat running and close the garage so I don't get bugs or whatever in there. And that's a big deal. I can sit on a call for like an hour and only lose 2 miles of range if I keep the AC low in the car. And again, if I'm going into the store, I can set pet mode where I can leave the AC running when I'm in the store so the car's not 1,000 degrees when I come back. These are things that you really don't do with internal combustion cars that you get used to with the electric car experience. Now, very clearly, I have a plug in my garage. I have a Lucid charger in my garage to charge this. So I don't have the issues with range anxiety anymore. And with a 430 plus mile range, or if I had the all season / low rolling resistance tires on here, I could get almost 500 miles range. I can even plan around trips very far away with one charging stop, and I don't even have to charge it all the way. So I think this car is the first one really where I'm not having to work around the confines of it. But I understand that not everybody's going to have that freedom of charging at home and in that part of it. But in terms of usability, you're not sacrificing anything. The usability, the storage is great, the software experience is better, but they have improved the ECU or the control unit for this car for the infotainment engaged cluster for this model year. More memory, more processing power, so it speeds up the entire experience, namely the mapping software. And the good thing about that is you can retrofit that processor into the older cars. So if you have an older Lucid Air, you can go to the service center and get the new processing unit, and you're not left behind. So there's thoughts to this that the brand's trying to do to make sure that your car is not completely disposable, that you don't have to buy the new one to get those updates. But it is definitely a big improvement over the original car that I drove. And I've been so satisfied with most of the experience, despite some of the bugs with the door handles and of course the Bluetooth drops. Things like the seats are incredible in here. The massagers on the upper trim level, you're never fatigued. Whether you're young or old, you can be in here 3-4 hours and you just don't want to get out. So I'm going to go into the shop and talk about some of the mechanical changes to this car over its life cycle and then take it for a drive. Now I'm going to cover the technical highlights for the Lucid Air. If you want granular detail from nose to tail, watch our Sapphire video or our Lucid Air Pure, where we talk to the engineers. So I'm going to detail some of the highlights of this car and why I think it's pretty amazing for this era. Now, Lucid had to put their best foot forward, right? They are in large part an engineering company first. They don't lead with marketing, and that may really hurt them, but there's not as much bullshit to cut through as other brands. Think of if you started a new company and you had a ton of competition. How would you separate yourself from all these other brands that have been doing it longer than you? And I think what they tried to do here is over-innovate, almost to a fault. And a lot of the things they've done are hyper expensive to do, and it's something you don't see, which is why it's actually really cool. It reminds me a lot of like what they did with the LFA, the original NSX, and the Porsche 918, where they were pushing the boundaries of what they could do on a massive budget. While this may not have the cool factor of having an internal combustion engine and some of the exotic design, in terms of the efficiency and packaging strategy of this, it is unrivaled, and I'm going to detail why. So you might look at this underneath, and it's one of the slipperiest cars, and they did that by flattening out the underbody. And you see this a lot. A lot of cars are flat underneath. But there's no rivets, there's not a ton of bolts on the center panel where the battery pack is at. They have wheel spats, air guides from the front that flow the air out the back, and aerodynamicists that used to work in Formula One helped to develop this. And the coolest part is, while battery packs, the underfloor here looks like it's flat, they curve the battery pack in the back to have a ramp up into the diffuser to flow the air out more smoothly. It's the way that the front end is designed, the way that the air moves over the car as well. The other part is the packaging. I know I talked about it in the interior space, but all of this, creating it from the ground up, is why the interior feels amazing, why it's so big, and why there's actual real usable storage. Things like SUV EVs don't even have as much usability as this thing. And all of this is those little details that may not sound exciting, but make this a great car. The other thing is the suspension. It's all aluminum. It's all multi-link, front and rear, with aero covers on the back suspension. And while many brands, many luxury brands do this, This company did it without using air ride, without adaptive sway bars, and without rear steer. It actually drives better than a lot of the modern high-performance machines, namely from BMW, where you feel so removed from the experience. Everything feels synthetic. This car feels more natural to drive because of the way and all the detail and the people involved of how they tuned it. So if you like to drive, if you want to feel like you're driving an older car, but in a good way, this bridges the gap between the old and the new. And all the engineering that went into tuning all of that, I'm going to talk about in the drive. This car, the Grand Touring, gets a 117 kilowatt hour battery pack. And with the summer tires, you do take a range hit. Definitely, I'm getting about 437 miles per charge with this pack. If you get the Aero wheels and tires with the low rolling resistance tires, you can get upwards of 500 miles of real world range. On a fast charger, regardless of the trim level, you could add 200 miles to your range of basically any one of the trims, between 12 and 18 minutes if you're on the right DC fast charger, and that's going to vary no matter where you're at. The big thing they've added to these cars, all of them now get a heat pump. Where it was reserved for the Sapphire and certain Grand Touring trims in the past, now it's on every trim level, which is going to help you big time in the winter from suffering range degradation. They've made some changes to the battery chemistry in the Sapphire because of the thermal load that goes on that, and some of those changes are going to be trickling into other models. They're not big on the model year, they're big on making production changes along the year. So they may be adding or removing certain things or fixing things or adding features along the way as they get there. It's a new car brand. So I'm going to look forward to seeing what they're doing in the future, but let's take this for a drive. All right, let's set off in the Grand Touring. 800 or whatever horsepower, launch control. Oh! Man. I don't want to say that it doesn't get old, but it gets old. I can count on one hand how many times I've done that in the past like 8 months. And it's not that 800 or whatever, how many torques it has either is not a big deal. It is. It's a totally big deal. It's one of the reasons why you buy this. But I found that where I sit is in smooth mode 99% of time, because that is the best suspension calibration for just driving on bad pavement. It smooths out the ride without being boaty. It's a complete luxury experience. And the throttle calibration is the most lazy of the three modes. Now, I want to talk about one of the highlights of the Lucid Air. And we talked about some of this with the Sapphire and the other cars. Where this brand does an exceptional job, because they have one car, well, they have more cars than this to worry about, but really this was their first one. They were trying to perfect each one of these systems to make them feel very natural. And we're talking about control, suspension, calibration. This has one of the best throttle programmings of any car that I've driven. Sports car, exotic car, luxury car, and most throttle now is throttle by wire. It's a synthetic pedal. It's all an approximation and tables of how you smooth out what your foot's doing to what the car thinks you want to do. And what's great about this compared to something like the BMW, the I-Series cars, the M Sport cars, is when you get in the upper modes, you hit the throttle and it snaps your neck. It's so jerky. There's no smoothing on the inputs. With this car, no matter if you stomp on it, it's smoothed out just enough to gradually bring on the torque and gradually bring on the power where you're not like doing this. It's never jerky. It's always trying to make it even. And just because it's an electric car and you have instant torque doesn't mean that it feels good or it's natural when you just turn on the power all the way. So even when I go into sprint mode and you're trying to accelerate, there's just enough smoothing on it to make it feel natural. And the good part about it is this car, when you get on it out of a corner, the stability control system, the way that it implements or sends power to the front and the rear motors is it eases into the power as you're turning, not to just do one wheel peels or causing the tires to smoke up like the Hyundai cars do. You pull out smoothly, it applies just the amount of power that the tires have grip for, and then it sends you. So there's always this unbelievable sense of stability from this car. And it all works so cohesively together. When I started this, I said controls, how do they blend steering, traction, stability control, throttle pedal, and then having a brake pedal that feels natural because it's a hydraulic brake pedal. So all of these things combined make this one of the best driving sedans I've been in modern history. There's only one other car, a sedan, luxury sedan, that I think of as kind of like a benchmark without going to high performance, and that's like the M55 or M series BMW with the V8. Not the full-blown M car, but that in-between, where it's completely smooth riding, it still handles well, it's rear-wheel drive, it gets around the corners, it has a ton of power, sounds good. But this, to me, is a far better, more cohesive car, and the other part of it, it's quieter. The drivetrain is so quiet. One of the major things they've improved here from the initial launch versions, the cars that came out in 22, is they've isolated out the front motor. And one of my big complaints about the early production car was there's so much motor whine from the front that's all you heard was that high pitch, that frequency that grates on your nerves. And I was like, I really hope that they fixed it. And I complained about it, and they implemented a new mount for the motor to the chassis. So now you no longer have that amplification of that high pitched sound, so it's even quieter, more refined. And I think, just from spending, about 6 months in this car, I would rather be in this car than almost every single car that I've driven. As a daily driver, I'm not talking about going to the track. I wouldn't take this to the track. But as a car that I want to go from point A to point B, there's nothing that feels so well thought out in terms of the driving experience, also being a luxury car, also being comfortable, and then if I want to turn up the power and I want to firm it up and I want to drive more like a Dick and feel it more rear wheel drive and get this thing to slide all over the place, it's just like 2 taps away. You can turn the stability control off in this car. You can do insane power slides, which I never do, but you could. And that duality, while still being a great luxury car, is my favorite thing about it. Now, if I had to have some complaints, I guess it has to do with kind of the software experience and just the usability of some of the software. I constantly feel like I'm looking down a lot to pack at the things. Like if I want to turn on the massager, I constantly swipe the wrong way and I go to the passenger side to turn that on. Just a lot of the usability of the screen part versus having physical controls has always been kind of my biggest grievance. But other than that, I mean, maybe in the previous car, before they fixed a lot of this stuff, the creaks and the rattles and all the other stuff that didn't particularly work great, it's all fixed here. This is an incredible car, and I would say that if you're looking at one of these, and obviously I'm going to continue this series, I don't think that the GT with all this power is really necessary, because I've driven the rear-wheel drive Pure. Yes, it's not as fast as this, but where you're actually driving and using it all the time, I don't think that this power is completely necessary, and it also hurts efficiency, despite this using the front motor more so for efficiency's sake. I could probably get 25% more range off just the standard rear-wheel drive car, and it would be almost equaled out to having this dual motor and bigger pack. So, I'm gonna get in the final thoughts. I'm gonna talk through some of the things, the pros and the cons, and where I feel this car and maybe companies going. I think by now you can tell I really like this car. The way that it drives, the way that it handles its overall performance, and the way that you feel on the inside along with its usability. This takes the sedan formula to the next level in terms of usability, and I no longer have to have like that small SUV to get the storage space and those things, and it's not on stilts. Yes, I don't have the command of the road, but you get the performance and the efficiency back from having a car lower to the ground. It's amazing in that regard. I think the most telling part for me is 95% of the time I want to be in this, regardless of the press cars that we're in. We just had a GT3 RS, and when we're on track, I was happy with it, but any other time I want to be back in here. It doesn't matter what car, and I've never felt like that in a long time unless it's something really special. So this car, with all the updates for 2025, has made it a car that I was kind of phobic to recommend unless you wanted to take a risk, and now it's at the place where you could lease it no problem and be happy with it, namely the Pure version, which is ultra efficient. It's going to get a lot of the same things that this Grand Touring version has, and if you spec it out right, you'll really like it. Yes, there's going to be bugs and there's going to be problems that they're probably not going to be able to fix this generation, and I find little things here or there, but they're not deal breakers anymore. So that's the big takeaway. The last thing I'm going to say is the electric car thing. You know, people are still beating us up talking about it. They don't think we like electric cars. And I think a lot of brands have spun up electric cars that are not good. They're not good cars regardless of if they're EV or not. They're very average. And this car, it just happens to be an EV, but they put the engineering time and budget into it, good or bad for them, that it transcends its EV nameplate. It's a good car, regardless of the electric drivetrain. It drives well, and that's not the gimmicky part of it. And if brands can focus on capturing some of what they did here and make it usable for a mass market, not just the people that can have the lifestyle to support it, I think this is going to be great for more than half of the cars on the market. There's still a place for internal combustion, namely in the sports car field. You can't replace the sound and the emotion of those cars, but you can replace a lot of the luxury element with far less complication if you do it right. So I'll see you in the next series of videos.